Carol Roth is a friend and a friend of the program. She's the author of the book, The War on Small Business. She's in her words, a recovering investment banker, worked on Wall Street for quite some time, but sees things from Main Street and can explain things to Main Street as opposed to everybody else who I just think talks about Wall Street stuff. And it doesn't matter to the average person unless you can break it down and explain it. Carol Roth, welcome to the program. Hi, Carol.
Hi, Glenn. How are you doing?
Good. So we have a couple of things I want to go through. First of all, the CPI, this is the Consumer Price Index, the inflation number is at 9.1. I loved your tweet the other day. Let me see if I can find it. You said, first, there will be no inflation. Then, inflation is transitory. Inflation is good for you. Inflation only hurts the rich. Inflation is the consumer's fault. Inflation is greedy business's fault. Inflation is Putin's fault. Inflation is backward looking. And your last one is breadlines are a great way to meet people. The latest is it's backward looking. That's what the White House came out and said. Those are old numbers. But they didn't say that the new numbers would be better.
I mean, backward looking, forward looking, up, down in a circle, like whichever way that you're looking, this is something that is affecting all of our lives. You know, I was thinking about taxation and how taxation is theft, but it is a one-time theft. It's a one-time theft of your earnings. Inflation is permanent theft. It permanently steals your ability to purchase goods and services, the wealth that you've created, everything that you've worked hard to earn and saved. And this is what we're seeing. And, you know, while the 9.1%, you know, wasn't necessarily a surprise, it is still really shocking to see it on paper. And as you and I have discussed before, you know, these are the manipulated numbers. These are the formula changes that have happened a few times since the 1980s. If you looked on this, you know, how it would have been on an apples to apples basis to 1980, it's probably about double that. So this is theft from the American people by central planning that was completely avoidable. And it is just so frustrating and angering.
So they said, I read an article early this morning that talked about there's a possibility that by the end of the month, the Fed is talking now about raising it another point. And you gave me a stat a while back because people don't think this. Our debt has interest attached to it. Right. And when we go out as a nation for $1 trillion, we have to pay interest. And you gave me a stat for every 1 point added, it adds to our debt and deficit. How much?
Okay, so just this is not a direct line, but basically think about this. We have about, you know, a 6 to 7 year average on our debt, which means that our national debt is constantly being refinanced. And as we take on new debt, we have to go out and pay for that at new rates. So whether you're refinancing it or you're taking on new debt, for every $1 trillion that we either refinance or take on a new debt, that will be an extra $100 billion that is added to our interest service on the debt. So stuff that we have already paid for. It's not a linear one-to-one. It's not like when the Fed funds rate goes up, it automatically increases the debt, but it does trickle through. It trickles through to the 10-year yields and the 3-year yields and the 2-year yields, which is the way that we have to finance our debt and what's paid for it.
So if we did have to redo $5 trillion in our debt, which is not unusual, if we had to buy and refinance another $5 trillion on our debt, that would add $1 trillion worth of debt, would it not? Because we've gone up 2 points, or we will have gone up 2 points.
Yeah, I mean, net, correct. Yes.
Yeah. Holy cow.
Yeah, I mean, the projections,
at what interest rate?
I was going to say, if you look at the CBO projections, they project out into the future, and the numbers in terms of the debt and what we're going to be paying on it in the future, and they're using conservative numbers. They're not even expecting these Fed rates, would absolutely blow your mind. I mean, it becomes the largest item that the government has to pay for, which obviously takes away spending from other areas and or increases your taxes.
Unless you're using modern monetary theory, which we are now basically using modern monetary theory, which means you can print whatever you want. The government doesn't have to worry about it. But that's exactly, they said it in Sri Lanka. They're using modern monetary theory, and it has wiped them out.
Yeah, this is basically the concept of what's happening here in terms of our liabilities. They're trying to take $1 from your left pocket, move it to your right pocket and go, oh, look, you have a new dollar. That's not the way that any of this works. And we are all feeling the effects of this, fantastical buy-in to magic money tree, aka MMT, modern monetary theory, the idea that just because you have the printing press that you can keep printing money without having a subsequent effect on the dollar. The money's supposed to stand for productivity. You earn this. This is a stable representation of your productivity. If you double or triple or quadruple the amount of those dollars without increasing productivity, then each one of those in turn is worth less. And that is what's happening. And that's why the value of our dollars are being eroded. Go back to that 1970s Saturday Night Live skit with Dan Aykroyd pretending to be Jimmy Carter. We're all going to be millionaires, and, we're going to be driving around in cars that cost, $20 million. So, it sounds great from a top line standpoint until you kind of get into it.
Okay, so most people put their money in their IRA, and then until they get older, they don't even look at it. And that's probably a good thing when you're dealing with the stock market. You just leave it in, and it has its ups and downs. And you start looking at it maybe when you're 50 or 60, and you're like, all right, wait a minute, and start to make sure that it's secure because there's not a long horizon that you're looking at. What's happening to people's 401ks right now, and what can they do?
So there was a research study that I picked up that came out, and they said from the beginning of the year to June of this year, people have lost $3.4 trillion in their retirement funds between 401ks and IRAs. This doesn't include any other money that may have been in the market. And this is, a horrendous situation that has been, completely fueled by Fed policy, really going all the way back to the Fed chair, Alan Greenspan, who decided that he was going to never let the market fall too much without having some intervention. Then in the Great Recession financial crisis, Ben Bernanke took that, put it on steroids, and then what Powell and his group have done has been, completely crazy. And we are living through these crazy boom and bust cycles. I'm sure that most of you have noticed that over the last several decades, things are very different than they were in the decades before, more of these huge booms and busts. And the reality is that the people who are already wealthy and well-connected, who have that long-term staying power, they don't mind this at all because they benefit when everything goes up. And then when everything goes bust, and you as somebody who's panicking and not sure what to do, you take your money out of the market, or perhaps in the Great Recession financial crisis, your home's foreclosed on. All of these things happen, and they fall on the shoulders of the little guy. And then these, I'm calling them vulture capitalists, come in well capitalized, buy everything up at pennies on the dollar, and then are positioned for the next boom cycle of interference. And this is just an epic wealth transfer. It's been happening, on an accelerated basis for decades and decades, and is the outgrowth of just this horrible central banking experiment that has gone wrong and has been a complete menace to society and to the wealth creation opportunities for the average American.
So what do people do?
So
I think we're losing the idea of retirement for a lot of people. I don't think that retirement is going to be a thing of the of the
Yeah.
nearer future.
Yeah, I mean, certainly not at the ages I think that people perhaps were expecting, because you don't know what's around the corner. This is where I encourage everybody to talk to their financial advisor, because each person's scenario is so different, and depending on your time frame, because of these boom and bust cycles that are caused by the Fed and central planning, timing is really important. Depending on when it is that you decide to change your portfolio structure, can change everything in your life. But if you are, younger and you have that ability to have the staying power, you want to do the same thing that the well-capitalized people are doing and wait for those bust cycles and be able to participate as a vulture capitalist, even if it's on a smaller scale, and buy low and ride the upside to that. But you need to have that planning in place, because we are now living in a way that's not free market. It's completely driven by this sort of externality. And that means that timing changes. And if you're somebody who's retiring in a bad cycle, you're going to feel that burden on an exponential factor.
So I have one more question for you, Carol. Let me take a 1-minute break and talk about what all of this is doing. What's happening is the president just said, hey, you got to be able to retire. And so I believe he just guaranteed all of the union pensions. So that means I'm now paying for union pensions if they default, which is insanity. But again, it's just another giveaway. I predicted this, I think, in 2009. That the government would step in and take all the union pensions and guarantee. But that means everybody else is paying for it, and we're struggling our own selves. I want to talk to you a bit about that, and then also, if this is what's happening here, what is all of this doing to other countries that have to pay for things in dollars? Back with Carol Roth in just a second. So, Carol, first of all, explain what the president did with the unions.
So he's still running around talking about the American Rescue Plan, which is, hilarious. He's got absolutely nothing to hang his hat on. So he's going back and he's running around and talking about what he did in March 2021. Now, obviously, he's not talking about all the bad things that came out of that. Things like,
right.
The stimulus that caused inflation and raising the reporting requirements for Etsy and eBay or lowering them, from $20,000 to $600 because, all those billionaires with $600 accounts, we need to crack down on them. He's hanging his hat on a piece of legislation that was in that was called the Butch-Lewis Act. And basically that was, we are going to be the guarantor of the union pensions. Now, we've been told that unions are very important, right? They need to be there in order to secure people's futures and be there for the workers, but apparently they're not real good at managing the pensions, so now we need to get involved. And so he touted that this was going to impact, several million pensions. Some of the reports I've seen are downplaying that number and saying it's fewer, but basically what they did is that there is a pension, guarantee corp, and they allowed them to do some things and change some things around to make sure that these pensions were solvent. But what they didn't do is actually anything structural to fix the pension. So just like, Social Security, all of the, state pensions, union pensions, like whatever it is that typically has a defined benefit attached to it, and ends up being a huge drag and a huge burden on everybody and not solvent. They just kicked the can down the road. But since he has absolutely no other accomplishments to hang his hat on, this is what he's talking about. But the part of it that really bothered me and, why I wrote the piece for The Blaze was that, again, this is the picking of winners and losers that we keep seeing over and over again with the government. And in this particular case, they are going to focus on making sure that the union folks don't lose 40% of their pension. But as I just told you, through June this year, they said $3.4 trillion was lost from 401ks and retirement funds. for other Americans who aren't affiliated with the unions. So, that to me seems, again, just this government picking of winners and losers. And certainly if you're going to do that, you would think that wouldn't be something you'd want to brag about. Maybe you'd do that on the down low, but he's out there touting that as his accomplishment.
All right, Carol, we've got to cut you loose. I got to get back to an Ohio story here in a second, but would you come back? We are crippling nations all over, especially emerging nations. They are going to be starving to death soon, some of them, and they have to pay their own debt back in dollars. Dollars are becoming more expensive for them. The world is going to hate us soon, I fear. We'll talk about that when you come back. Thank you so much, Carol.